But I know some of you actually think when you went out and you brought a Hebrew Bible, because it said Tanakh, which is an acronym for Torah, Nevim, Ketubim, which is to say the law, the prophets, and the holy writings. I think many of you, many of us may have thought that that was the original name for the Old Testament. And let me tell you from now, no, it was not. The two oldest ways to describe the Old Testament is to refer to it as Kara or Mikra. In borrowing that name and appellation, Muhammad later names his book the Quran, which is the Arabic rendition of
TikTok. This is definitely about to go over 10 minutes because I cannot rush this. One of my students sent me this video because he know that I've been teaching on this for over the past year. So I come with some correction on today. Muhammad did not borrow the name of the Quran from the Israelites, and it was not inspired by the teachings of the Israelites. The Quran was literally written by the Israelites in the Arabic nation, and to the Arabic nation, excuse me. And it was written by the Israelites and given to Muhammad. When we begin to look at the specific branch of the Israelites who wrote the Quran, we're going to look at the Karaite Jews. But first, we must understand whom they were writing against and what was going on during the time of Yeshua and before, so that we can prove that the Israelites indeed did verify Muhammad as a prophet in, I believe it was 629 AD, when he began to fulfill the prophecy in the book of Daniel to establish the kingdom that would last forever. So first we want to begin to look into the fact that the kingdom was split in the time of King Solomon. And when we begin to look at the split of the kingdom in the time of King Solomon, you have the southern kingdoms of Benjamin, Judah, and Levi. These are those that still remained in West Africa. These are your Bantu people whom never left West Africa. Mind you, a remnant of them remain in West Africa, but you do see Judah, Benjamin, Levi, and Simeon being taken into Babylonian captivity in 586 BC, and again in Persian captivity around 332 BC. So this is essential to understand that whenever some of the Israelites were taken out of their land, they were replaced with those other people. So that would tell us that the Babylonians and the Persians, the Elamites, not only were they converted by the Israelites during the Persian Empire, but these people group would begin to come into their lands because they were subjugating the lands. We see that all the time. So when we begin to look at the other tribes that they began to deem as lost, this is the northern kingdom. They were called Israel. They were called Ephraim. They were called the house of Joseph, the house of Joseph. So when Yeshua began to come and he stated, I have come not but for the lost sheep of the tribe of Israel. This means that he was going after those whom was in the northern kingdom captivity. When we begin to backdate the northern kingdom captivity, this takes us to the book of Isaiah in 722 BC. And this is when the northern kingdom of the Israelites were taken by the Assyrians, okay? And they were taken into Spain, to Portugal, Ireland, Germany, Poland, the Ukraine, France, Britain, so on and so forth, and the Americas. Okay, this is the chattel slavery as prophesied in Deuteronomy 28 and 68. Chattel slavery in Africa is backdated from 6,500 BC. You see it again in second millennial BC. You see it again in 1500 BC, around the times of the Shashu of Yahweh. You see chattel slavery during the aforementioned Babylonian captivity. You see chattel slavery during the Assyrian captivity. You see chattel slavery through the Persian captivity. And then when you begin to look between the books of Malachi and the book of Matthew, this is the 400 years that the Black church began to erroneously teach that the Most High went silent. Yet the Roman Catholic Church, as well as the Nazarenes, the Ebionites, the Essenes, and the Ethiopic Church are aware of the fact, the Egyptian Jews are aware of the fact that the Apocrypha was written between Malachi and Matthew. This begins to take us back to the statue in Daniel when the Greek captivity, okay? So now when you see these Israelites in 722 BC being taken into Europe and into the Americas, well, into the Asian subcontinent, because Europe was always part of Africa, then we begin to understand that in the book of Isaiah, it states that when these Israelites were taken from this land, then you begin to have the Assyrians and the Babylonians come into where these Israelites were. And they brought their own gods in, and then a priest from the northern kingdom, which will be Gad, the lawgiver, had to come back into Canaan to teach them the sacrificial system of Yahweh. It's very important to know that one of the gods that was brought in by the Assyrians and the Babylonian name was Nergal. And when we begin to look at this god, he is represented by a Calducus. It's very essential to understand that the sacrificial system was not set in place until the time of the Levites. And this was the vision that Abraham began to have when he began to take the carcass and split them. This was a form of divination that was seen practiced by the Inuit native Indians of Siberia. You see, Iberia is the root of Siberia, and the root of Iberia is Eber. And Eber is the son of Shem, and where we begin to get the word Hebrew. And so this would begin to explain why you have Siberian and Russian DNA found in native Indians. The Inuit native Indians began to take the carcass of animals and drink tea and go into a deep sleep or a trance in order to receive prophecy, to see when the famine will begin to end, when future warfare will begin to take place, and where they should go to next. The book of Genesis, the 12th chapter, is dated to 2181 BC, when Abraham began to leave Ur due to the famine, which was grievous. I believe that's Genesis 12 and 6. And when we began to look at this practice, he began to take the carcass, and he did not divide the pigeon or the turtle dove. This was the sacrifice of the poor. The poor in Hebrew is Ebone. This would be called the Ebionites, whom are the followers of Yeshu, which is the name of the Church of Jerusalem. We begin to see Mary and Joseph give the sacrifice of the poor, but these people were not poor people. When we begin to see Jesus and Mary, they had ships. They had souls on their ships. These were not poor people. They were poor, meaning meek in spirit. The meek shall inherit the earth. The poor, or the Ebionites, shall inherit the earth. When we begin to take a gander into Selah, according to the Quran, Selah is also seen in the genealogy of Shem. Selah, may peace be upon him, was the first deliverer of the Ebionite message in Saudi Arabia and in Hagar, Egypt. Hagar is not only a toponym to describe the Arabic nations, but Hagar also means sojourner or foreigner, making Hagar an epithet for Abraham's second wife as the mother of the Arabic people, as she was a foreigner or a sojourner in Egypt, proving that the dynasties in the time of Abraham were Semitic. Line up on line, precept on precept. And this is why when he went to marry Keter again, this was him taking Keter, whose name not only means innocent, but it denotes a knot, saying that she did not sleep with another man since she was put away. The word again, and he took for her a wife again, is seen when we begin to speak on King Solomon, and he prophesied again and prophesied again. This is the second marriage and the regathering of his first wife, when we begin to see his son Isaac go to Paran in order to find Ishmael. And this is keeping up the Igbo's belief system that the husband cannot get married, that the son or the daughter cannot get married until the father paid his dowry unto his first wife or married the first wife. Hagar did not receive a dowry when she left the house of Abraham. Line up on line, precept on precept. When we begin to see the sacrificial system enter into ancient Egypt, the god by the name of Refesh. Refesh in Hebrew has the root of Rapha, meaning to come back to life. When we begin to look at the term, and it came back to life, this is talked about in the book of Job 38 through 42, talking about the dead things under the sea came back to life. Refesh in Hebrew literally means a fire, a flame, fever. This is a deity that was sacrificing bullocks and lambs on top of the temple of El, desecrating El's temple in ancient Egypt. When we begin to look at El Shaddai said that obedience is better than sacrifice. El Shaddai began to ask, who asked you for sacrifice? I just wanted you to obey. The word obey, the word hear, and the word submission in Hebrew is Shema. When you begin to look at Islam, Islam literally means submission to one Allah or to one Elohim. It is essential to understand that Allah in Hebrew is the sacrificial system of the Israelites. A-L-A-H. It said that Abraham went up, or he ascended. And when we see the Israelite people group, they go into the mounds and into the mountains and to ascend, to sacrifice of themselves to one deity. The Shema is in the book of Deuteronomy, the 9th chapter, verses 6 through 4. Submit, obey, hear Israel, the Lord our God is one. That's Akkad. When we begin to look at Yeshu, he began to say that to worship God only, that there is only one God. He quoted the Shema. He was teaching Islam. When we begin to understand that Yahweh came in with his sacrifices in the time of Moses. Moses was born in 1492 BC. Moses learned the sacrificial priesthood from Jethro the Midianite. Midian and Midian are the children of Keter and Abraham. In 1600 BC, the Midianites became one and the same with the ancient Sumerians and the ancient Babylonians, meaning that their practices was Sumerian and Babylonian, and these are the practices that Abraham was being pulled out of, line up on line, precept on precept. Then when you see in 1550 BC, you see the statue of Yahweh in ancient Egypt. The biblical narrative has taught us that the Midianites and the Rechabites worshiped Yahweh exclusively and perfectly. So the Kenite and the Rechabite and the Midianite hypothesis is not hypothesis, it is historical fact. When we begin to look at these historical facts of the priesthood, we will begin to go back into the Apocrypha during the time of the Greeks and the Hasmonean dynasty, where you begin to see the Midianites, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Persians, the Elamites, and the Nabateans marry into the tribe of Benjamin, who wholly took over the priesthood from the Levites as well as the kingship. So by the time of Yeshu, the tribe of Benjamin was completely full of converts. And these are the Pharisees, who believe in death and resurrection, because they went back to the Babylonian practices of Tammuz, the rising and the dying god of 3 days and 3 nights, keeping their Babylonian and Assyrian and Sumerian practices that Jethro began to teach Moses, going back into the god Nergal of death and resurrection. It's important to understand that this was a representation of the winter solstice. And the book of the Maccabees began to teach us that on December 25th, they came in and desecrated the temple by erecting a statue of Zeus and slaughtering a black pig on the altar. The Greeks have actually stated in their chronology that when they went into the temple of the Israelites, they saw them sacrificing unto a donkey god. The donkey in ancient Egypt is represented by Set. When we begin to look at the Baal cycle, which is the Ugaritic text talking about El and Asherah, the mother and father of the 70 gods, which is verified by the Aramaic Targums. Aramaic is the language that was beginning to be spoken by the Israelites due to Persian captivity in the time of Daniel, in the time of Ezra, in the time of Nehemiah, and in the time of Esther, the time of Isaiah. These books are written in Aramaic. Yeshua began to speak in Aramaic. The original book of Matthew was written in Hebrew and in Aramaic. They will be called the Gospel of the Nazarenes, the Gospel of the Ebionites, and the Q source. In the Q source, it's very important to understand that the Q source stated that Yeshua on the cross, his soul was kept from death, as so written in the book of Psalms, the 20th chapter, and so written in Psalms, the 91st chapter, that the Messiah would be Yeshu. He would be saved, or he would be delivered. Rabbinic Judaism will begin to take the prophecy concerning Jeremiah being pierced and scorned in Babylonian captivity to apply it to Yeshu in order to make him a messianic figure of the dying and rising God after Mithras, after Tammuz, after these deities of these other nations that took over the Israelites' religion. And the one who made him as the Son of God was the Apostle Paul, who comes from the tribe of Benjamin and was indeed called an apostate by the Ebionites, or the Church of Jerusalem, James the Just, who was the brother of Yeshua. The Apostle Paul began to address Herodias as his kinsman. The Herodian dynasties, the Herodians were Edomites and Nabateans, and they were forced to convert to the Israelite religion and married into the tribe of Benjamin during the time of the Greeks, during the time of the Apocrypha. So during December 25th, this is Hanukkah, the Feast of Dedication, because they had to rededicate the temple. Yet you begin to see people, instead of doing Hanukkah, what they begin to do is celebrate Christmas, okay? Celebrating Tammuz, the god of the rising and the falling god. Now, when we begin to look into when Yeshua begins to say that one will come in my name, many will come in my name, who came in the name of Jesus. Paul did, saying that I am the Christ, saying that I am the Messiah. Who said that he was the Messiah? Paul did. The Ebionites, the Nazarenes, the Essenes began to state that Yeshua was a prophet and that he was born through a human birth. And when he got baptized, he became endowed with the spirit of prophecy, the spirit of wisdom, and wisdom and her children, and the mother, the Ruach HaKodesh, rested up on him. And she was still up on him. The Holy Spirit is feminine. The spirit of wisdom is feminine, according to the book of Proverbs, the 8th chapter. And she began to rest up on him, even on the cross, to keep his soul from death. The book of Revelation began to say the spirit of wisdom was the martyrdom of Yeshua. The spirit of wisdom had to be sacrificed in order to go back to the heavens, to be released back to the pleroma. The word pleroma means fullness. The fullness or the completion is mushlam. It is complete. It is finished. And this is due to the fact that the Ebionites, Yeshua began to teach that the God of the Old Testament, the God of Moses, who was calling down fire, when the disciples began to say, do you want me to call down fire? Yeshua said, you know not in what spirit you speak of. Elijah and Moses called down fire. When Yeshua began to say the Father in heaven is all good, the God of Isaiah began to say, I created good and evil. When Yeshua began to state and say that your father wouldn't give you stones, he would give you fish to eat. When the Israelites were taken into the desert by Moses, they were given stones. And when they were finally given fish to eat, those that ate were killed. So Yeshua was letting us know that the God of Moses was not the God that we were supposed to serve, that we were supposed to be serving the one God of the book of Genesis, the first chapter, and the one God that was being worshipped by Noah and all of his sons, the one God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob began to prophesy to us and warn us not to go into the secret assemblies, the secret councils of the Levites. And we did as such. So when we began to come into this statue of Daniel, Daniel stated that after the Greek and after the Roman and these 10 toes, which represented the Neo-Ottoman Empire, that there will be one who comes, whose kingdom will last forever. The book of Isaiah began to state that this one would be a bringer of new wine. New wine in the Near Eastern concept is likened unto the placenta. Placenta in Hebrew is Shiloh. Shiloh is linguistically related to Shiloh. Shiloh is the one that was prophesied by Jacob to come after the scepter departed from Judah. Yeshua was from the tribe of Judah because of his father Joseph. If his genealogy went through Mary, he would be a Levite, line upon line, precept on precept. So you have this Judaic Messiah coming to regather the lost sheep from the tribes of the northern kingdom, meaning that he had to actually go to the northern kingdom in order for them to receive his word. So during those 12 to 30 years, Yeshua went to the exiles and the isles And then after him, you had the one who was prophesied to come again as the comforter. The root word of the comforter holds the same root as the name of Muhammad. So when we begin to look at the Aramaic version of the book of Matthew, we will see the name of Muhammad. Muhammad was to come with a new song and new wine to go out to the Arabic nations and the Israelites as prophesied in the book of Isaiah, the 42nd chapter. And they said, who would be deaf and dumb? The deaf and dumb prophet was verified by the Karaite. The Karaite are the Karaite Jews. These are the writers of the Quran. These are the writers of the original Torah. The Quran is the Torah that we are supposed to lean into. The Quran is the writers of the Karaite, or the Karaite Jews, verified the Prophet Muhammad. And then they wrote in Hebrew, deaf and dumb, in the Quran. He is the one that came in to reestablish the submission of one deity and peace. He is the one that the government shall be up on his shoulder. The government is Mizraim. Muhammad ended up taking Islam back into Egypt, because Egypt was the place where James the Just, Mary, Mark, and Joseph of Arimathea, they went into Egypt into 39 AD. And after that, they went into France. They went into Europe. They went into Spain. They went into Portugal, so on and so forth. They went into Great Britain. So when we begin to see the Prophet Muhammad, he was verified by the Israelites. He was prophesied by Isaiah. He was prophesied by Jacob. He was prophesied by Daniel. He was prophesied by Yeshua. Muhammad was spoken of from the beginning, even with the Torah being called the Korah, the call, which is why Yeshua said many are called. The word many in Hebrew is Rab. Rab is the root word of Arab. Many are Korah, but few. The word few is not only Ma'at, which is the name of wisdom in Egypt, but few also is Joktan. The Joktan Arabs is where our mother Khadijah, may peace be up on her, begins to spring out of. The Owls of Kedar that David began to visit, the tents of Kedar, where he literally went during that time. Kedar is the son of Ishmael. Kedar is the tribe where Muhammad begins to come from. So once again, Islam was not inspired by the Old Testament. Islam is not some branch of Abraham religion. Islam has been spoken about in the Bible, through every book, through every chapter, through every verse. So when Muslims began to say that Yeshua did not die on the cross, this was being taught way before Muhammad ever hit the scene. This was the original Q source. Before the apostate Apostle Paul wrote his letters and brought in Gentiles. The Gentiles, according to the Bible, are the northern kingdom Israelites, whom were prophesied to be regathered and rejoined as the dry bones in the book of Ezekiel. And the Gentiles are the Arabic nations. The Gentiles were never the Horites, the Hittites, or the Amorites. This is Jacoya.